Amale Andraos.
This is Dan Wood.
We're a work architecture company, WORKac in New York.
We do a lot of institutional projects, cultural projects. We do a lot of master plans and competitions, as well as a lot of kind of theoretical investigations.
We have done a number of different things throughout the history of the firm, and we've, I'd say, more recently narrowed our focus to the projects that Amale said. We also really work in all our projects to kind of intertwine, recombine, reinvent the relationship between the urban, the rural, and the natural.
I think it's a question we ask every day, and it's a question we try to answer through our practice and our research. In many ways, as Bernard Tschumi would say, architecture is what you want it to be, and we're firm believers that it's a kind of field that can be reinvented and needs to be reinvented constantly. I think that working within the discipline, but constantly expanding its boundaries and critiquing its core values. I think for us, in the past decade, we've sort of borrowed a lot of the discourse from urbanism, from ecology, from landscape, and sort of brought them to architecture. Questions of density, of compression, of intelligent systems, of architecture as infrastructure. All these things have sort of occupied our understanding of architecture. And, more recently, I think we're again interested in the power of the object itself to create and change the context around it.
I think that we're very open to architecture and what architecture is and can be. I think we have a very specific approach that we're taking and really evolving and constantly learning and relearning from. But I also think that we are very inspired by all the architects working today, especially the younger generation. And I think really recognize that the kind of broad range of approaches that there are to architecture, which is maybe different than prior generations. And I think recognizing that architecture as a discipline is simply the investment of building projects or urban projects with an idea or with the kind of spark, with the kind of idea about reinvention, and that can be materials or space or program, and kind of recognizing that most of the buildings and structures and cities that most of the world is involved in is kind of outside of architecture, and architects' role is to really bring that kind of spark of the new. I mean, I think the role of the architect is really to lead and to lead by example, because I think that, we have to recognize that architects can't design every single thing in the world, not every structure or every corner of every city. But really the projects that the architects invest in can really become a kind of touchstone for new ways of thinking about development and cities and structures. I think that personally, we are really actively engaged with thinking through how to deal with climate change and the environment as it exists today, and really what we can do to kind of inspire people or lead by example to really address issues of sustainability and climate change. I think that's really, someone the other day said that in a way it's like architects during World War II, that, the war was on and the projects kind of were always tempered by that fact, while they didn't always deal directly with the war. But in a way, we are in this kind of situation where climate change is just such a major impact on the profession.
In the past decade, we've seen how an expanded understanding of the architect has produced really interesting new models, whether there are architects who visualize, in different ways, map data science, or map data, sorry. Architects such as you, who started a kind of entire network of probing the discipline and the canon and saying, hey, we have to engage the entire world in this conversation about what the canon is. I think that's a very critical role in the way that we, teach architecture. What history do we teach? Whose history do we teach? All these questions I think are being transformed now. And in terms of as Dan says, in terms of the architecture itself as an object, how it can negotiate a new relationship to questions of climate change, to questions of density and urbanism, to the questions of environment, and not just through performance, but also in a way almost through meaning, and a kind of as a cultural project. I think is really sort of critical in our work. For example, the last time we spoke, it was right after winning the PS1 Young Architecture Program competition, and we sort of almost pioneered this. We put architecture at the heart of this conversation about food and cities in a place where it doesn't necessarily belong, and then sort of opened up a new territory for us to. Basically, we find that a lot of the ideas, that were started with PS1 are still the ideas that we're dealing with and grappling with at a different scale today. So from PS1, we went to the edible schoolyard. We also are designing a kind of 4-foot wide public kind of vertical space in Miami, which is a storefront for parking, and trying to create public space and a new sort of public experience with collecting water and infrastructure and systems, and a lot of the ideas that were in PS1. And our project for Gabon, even though it's a kind of, I don't know how many times the scale of PS1, actually builds again on these ideas of architecture as a kind of at the intersection of all these systems of collecting water and integrating landscape and even producing food and kind of representing that set of relationships.
I think in each project we look at a lot of options. We're always kind of testing option after option after option. But then you can also see the work of the office as a series of options in a way, which is kind of interesting. So each project, so we did PS1, and that was about food and farming, and then we did a whole series of projects where we said, what other aspects of food are interesting. So we did fish farming, and we did vertical farming, and we looked at it from all different angles, and then we saw some formal relationships in the projects that came out of that then got translated to others.
I think for us, we have tried to stay away from the sort of expression of cultural specificity, cultural difference, the notion that, the moment you work in Africa, things need to look African, and rather have looked at the particular history of Gabon and its engagement with tropical modernism, the master plan that was designed for it by this Italian architect called Diolivo, who was a friend of Soleri, who was really interested in integrating urbanism and ecology already in the late 60s. So that kind of big, long tradition of architecture and urban planning in the country that was really trying to integrate the incredible sort of landscapes and ecosystems of the country with the architecture and the built environment. So that was the history that we were most interested in, and in general is the history that we are most interested in, rather than the kind of, again, this notion of a opposition between the local and the global, or between tradition and modernity. And so, of course, that project being a kind of center for diplomacy and for the African Union had as its mission the representation of an emerging country. But that question really aligned itself with our desire to only represent through these kinds of new relationships with the environment, or with setting new relationship between landscape and architecture.
I think you should approach school like a kind of laboratory experiment where you are involving yourself in as many different and varied things as possible, and not worrying so much. I don't think school is really the place to develop your own singular voice. There's plenty of time for that in architecture, but really kind of absorbing and learning and experimenting in school.
I would agree that it's I think not to be afraid to take risks, to experiment, to be exposed, to constantly be curious and question, both question any ideas that is presented to you, as well as question your own kind of preconceived notions of what architecture can be or should do. I think that's the role of the school, and it's not easy, but in this age of kind of entrepreneurship and creativity and sort of in the age of kind of information, I think that's the really, we cannot no longer offer a kind of very top-down mode of education. It's a kind of dialogue and a conversation that we need to create, and so that's what a school needs to do, and I think that curiosity then, would move out into the world, and if all the experiences are valid, whether you work in a big, amazing firm that is focusing on design, or whether you're engaged in a kind of startup, enterprise, all of these experiences kind of shape where you want to go as a kind of young architect, and I think that the outcomes are quite exciting if you look at people 10 years out of graduation,
like us. We only know our own experience, but I would say we certainly learned a lot. I think that I can give a few pieces of advice to those starting out. One is to think big, definitely. Set your firm up like it's going to be a big firm. Get the right insurance, get the right office space. Concentrate on the kind of projects that you really want to get, even if they seem completely out of reach. Don't forget your past, working wherever you were and how they did it, and really kind of establish it like that. But at the same time, keep your overhead low. Keep your overhead as low as possible, especially those first years. With low overhead, you'll be able to take lower fees, and you'll be able to get the clients who have high ambition and low budgets, which are great clients for when you're starting out. Then you can kind of accept more work. With low overhead, you can really do experimental work, because you can basically tell your clients, you're not paying us anything, or paying us very little, so let's at least do something fun. Third is to be open to everything and to collaborate as much as possible. I think at one point, after 5 years of being in practice, I did a little chart of where all of our projects had come from. And I would say the vast majority of them came through our consultants, engineers, graphic designers, and everything. So everybody loves the new kid on the block. So if you just kind of spread the word that you've started your own firm and really start collaborating with people, they'll bring you stuff to do.